At the time of completing editing of this video, I remembered that I completely forgot to mention one very important point, and that is this roll of film went through a CT scanner at an airport. One of those new ones that everyone's warning us against, it went through one of those. So that, along with my scanning practices that I'm still learning and figuring out, might contribute to my opinions of the shadows and highlights, reds and blues and the casting colors and all that stuff. It might contribute to that, so keep that in mind when watching this video, but I hope you enjoy it nonetheless. Kodak Ektar 100, the 35mm film stock. I shot that at the Gold Coast through my Nikon F2 with a 50mm f1.4 lens. Most of the shots are from my time at the Gold Coast in Australia, and then there were some exposures left over which I shot when I was spending time with my brother and with Lauren. So I'll specify when we're not in the Gold Coast, but let's get straight to it. You know what? Let's start with this one that is not from the Gold Coast. This is not my first time shooting Ektar 100. The first time I shot it, I believe it was the first roll of 120 film that I'd ever shot, and I was quite confused by the colors. And that's okay, we learn all the time, but from my experience with Kodak Ektar 100, and I've only got 2 film rolls experience worth of opinions for it, one 120 and then one 35mm. And my impression is that there's an overall redness, especially in the shadowy areas. So the reds are very red. Your greens will have an overcast of red if the greens are more towards the shadows, and I find that the highlighted areas tend to be more on the bluey, not even cyan, I think it's more of a blue, and that overall magenta tint I think is a product of the red cast in the shadows along with a more blue highlight. Those two combined contribute to a magenta tint, but because it's not necessarily, in my opinion, a magenta tint due to the properties, the emulsion properties of the film, it's more the red cast along with the blue highlights. I think that could explain why I can't account for that magenta tint in the tint color settings. You know, you can do temperature and tint. In order to kind of account for that magenta feeling, I need to address the red cast in the shadows more than anything else. I hope that makes sense, and I might stand to be corrected with that analysis. So it is a little bit confusing, and I found it tempting, as you can see here by this image. It's got an overall coolness, very saturated, which is even more saturated by the fact that I push my saturation up all the way for pretty much all of my edits of Kodak Ektar 100 through this 35mm roll. I'd say you get some beautiful contrast. If you don't like magentas, if you don't like cooler tones, if you don't like heavy saturation, if you don't like a bunch of what I think is quite a vibrant feel to a photo, this might not be the film stock for you, because you might find yourself trying to take those aspects or those characteristics away, which I wouldn't recommend, because that's what this film stock is, as far as I can tell from my very limited experience. As you can tell again from the same image, is a predominance of red, which I account for over here, which I don't know if I should actually be doing that, because that is the film stock, but there is the advantage of doing the post-processing by yourself. So there's that, but I try to keep my own personal opinions on the film out of the editing process while maintaining a visually pleasing impression or image that suits my preferences. What am I saying? This is my brother. I love this photo. As you can tell, there is an overwhelming magenta feeling to it, and also a coolness to it, and the skin tones aren't quite accurate, but for photos like this, I think it's beautiful. As you can tell by this curve over here, I removed ever so slightly from the shadows. I removed that red tint. If I were to take it back to what it was, I'll show you what it looks like. See, there's a redness to those shadows that kind of interferes with the green. So if I undo what I just did there, look at this area over here. I'm going to Control Z, take it down ever so slightly to just bring the greens to a more pleasing tone, at least to me. As you can tell, super punchy, contrasty, saturation, heavy. It's another one of my brother. As you can see, look here, how much of the reds I removed from the shadows, and I'll quickly show you what it would have looked like if I kept that. See that? So my scanning could contribute to the amount of red that you see here, but I have read a little bit after taking the photo. I did read a bit because I was a bit confused and concerned about all this red in the shadows, and it's apparently quite It's a characteristic which I removed in some of my photos. And I still don't quite, you know what, I know how I feel about it. It's not the best practice because you buy a film stock because of the film stock's characteristics. And if you're going to do a bunch of changes, what's the point? I realize that now, and I'll be more conscientious of that in the future when I buy film stocks, or when I buy Ektar again, I'll be more aware of that, and I'll be conscientious of the type of photos that I'll be taking with the Ektar. I still want to buy other film stocks so that I can experience them, understand what I'm getting myself into as I'm editing the photos, kind of learn by experience, which is why I don't really read up on film stocks before I use them. But now I know Ektar from my scanning and from my photos and how I take photos, so now I can understand the type of environments for which I would use Ektar. Let's Control Z here. Take it back. I love this photo. I love this photo. Let's take it a bit lower. Very red, as you can see. That's Nick and Lauren eating a donut. Can't remember exactly where we were here. It was a drive from the Gold Coast out. Can't remember exactly where we were heading towards. I think Byron Bay. But yes, there's a very unnatural rendition of the skin tones and an overall unnatural rendition of all the colors here, but this is more true to the film stock, even though, as you can see, I did remove some of the red over here. But for me, this is a beautiful photo as it is, and I'm happy to have kept a predominance of the red in the shadows and in the overall image. Blue skies. Even with the saturation taken all the way up here, it's not as vibrant as you would have expected. This was an overcast day, and because it was an overcast day, you'd expect the sky to be grey, but it's blue. Little abstract motion blur image here of a parakeet. This is not a parakeet, this is a lorikeet, and as you can tell, look at this. Look how much I took down the reds here. Oh, and for those of you that are interested in like pretty much what I do to my photos, with Ektar what I've been doing is just the curve where I take my whites to the white point and take my... This is actually not a really good representation because it is a very skewed image. Another lorikeet on a man's head. See the same thing over here. Just so that you know, if you're interested in how I edit my photos, I take my whites to where the whites pretty much begin, my white points on the curve, and then I take my black to where the black points are. This is a reverse curve because it's a negative. And for the Ektar, I've been taking my contrast up ever so slightly, or quite a bit, and then my saturation goes up to really push the features of the Ektar 100, with the exception of the red overcast or the red cast in the shadows. If you're curious as to what that would look like, there it is. I think that a bunch of this, or a significant proportion of this, might be my scanning. It is what it is, and I'm still enjoying it. Pretty underexposed image here, but as you can tell, very minimal changes to my red point here. More feeding. So the photos you've been seeing up until the lorikeets were in the Gold Coast. Before that was not the Gold Coast, so we kind of did this all in reverse. Let's get into some shots of the Gold Coast. Beach shot. This is at what you could consider to be golden hour, except on this particular evening, it wasn't very golden. It was more on the purples and blues, but not as much of the gold. And you can see that by these images. It's a bit of an unnatural look to the sand, which I quite like. See, it's not very gold, but as you can see, the reds, anything that is red is even more red. So I removed the red from the shadows over here to just get it looking a bit more, I'm not sure if natural is the right word, but let's take this back to what it is. See, that's a bit much. I do feel like I've got some lovely photos of the surfers here. For a lot of these ones of the landscapes and the non-people scenes, I took the vibrance up because I felt it looked nicer that way. This is probably a somewhat underexposed, but it's alright. As you can tell, I was having a good time. Taking photos of the surfers, the fishermen. See, there's the highlighted areas here. You can really tell where the blue really comes through in the highlights, and it's quite red in the shadows. Quite like this one here too. And we're getting on to one of my favorites from the roll of film. This one here of the rocks. I love it. There's a lot that I could have done with this photo. There was more that I wanted to do, but I didn't want to take it too far. But they could have, I could have brought more color into the rocks, but I try to practice some restraint because my photos can be a bit much, I know that. but I'm happy with this one as it is. But the next one, this one I think some people might consider too much, but I love it. This is Karimban Alley, and as you can tell, I brought up the vibrance a lot on here. I like it, added just a little bit more contrast and a bit of an oomph to the photo, and I'll show you what it looked like without the vibrance, which is a more muted feeling. It's got a more muted overall appearance, which I do find appealing, but I can't help myself, and this is the way that I'm choosing to present it. And then there's this one didn't come out too well. I think this is underexposed, unfortunately, and I think these might be just a tad bit underexposed. I should have maybe overexposed ever so slightly, but you live and you learn. This is one of the first ones I took, and then the first one was this one here. There was a version of this particular photo that looked better, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but I think I loved it more than this. Julia likes this one a lot. This is the first frame from the set, and it just set the scene for my entire stay at the Gold Coast. An amazing time. Ektar 100 overall, it is not my favorite film stock. So far, my favorite film stock is Fuji Pro 400H, which is a shame because it's not manufactured anymore, so you gotta look around for it. I'm gonna leave it at that with my opinions for film stocks, because my opinions are my experience is limited. I'm still figuring it out. Overall, Ektar 100, shadows, red, highlights, blue from my experience, with my exposure and my my scanning. That's my experience so far. I need to put together my first experience ever of 120 film, which was Ektar 100. I need to put that together still and share that with you. It is completely different scenes as well, so it'll be quite an interesting take. And yeah, so if you're not interested, if you don't like super saturated, quite vibrant, heavy contrast, more on the cool magenta and strangely on the red cast look of photos, this might not be the film stock for you. But if you find yourself curious, it's definitely one to check out. Not necessarily for people, more for landscapes and stuff like that. And as I'm sitting here and I'm looking at this photo, I do realize that it's quite on the green cast side, so I might fix that ever so slightly as my final, maybe something like that. But it gets to a point where this is just stuff that I did for fun. I was on holiday. I don't need to worry too much about the quality. It's the memory, it's the experience, it was the calm that I felt while I was there, and I'm so happy that I got the opportunity to go and visit the Gold Coast. I hope this video was informative. It was quite on the subdued level of presentation, and I hope it wasn't too long. Just to give you a little taste of what I've been doing. This is stuff I've been working on here. And my 2 film cameras that arrived to me in not great condition after weeks and weeks and weeks and months of fixing, calibrating. Both of them, my EcoFlex 2 and my Pentacon 6, are in working condition now, and I will be putting those videos together at some point soon. I'm very happy with the results, and I'm looking forward to sharing them with you. Thanks so much for taking the time to be here, folks. Don't forget to keep taking photos, keep making videos, take care of yourselves, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers. And if you're interested in my take on Kodak Gold in studio, that video is on your screen right now or linked down below.